This is the Horse Radio Network.
This is episode 1220 of Horse Tip Daily, your almost everyday morsel of helpful hints, useful facts, and practical techniques for horse folks. Brought to you today by Kentucky Performance Products. Greetings, horse people. Coach Jen here, and thanks for tuning in to Horse Tip Daily. Today's tip features Karen Eisberg from Kentucky Performance Products, and she is joined by dressage radio show co-hosts Philip Parks and Reese Kofler-Stanfield. And they're going to have a little chat about what fats in your horse's diet do and why not all fat is created equal.
Well, tonight we have the Kentucky Performance Products Tip of the Month with KPP, Kentucky Performance Products President Karen Eisberg. Karen, welcome to the show.
Hi, Reese.
Well,
Hi, Philip. Nice to be here.
We are so happy to have you.
We're happy to have you on.
Well, Karen is fantastic. She is who we work with at Maple Crest Farm with our supplements, and she is a genius. So I'm so happy that she's here to talk to us today. We're going to talk about this month feeding supplemental fat to meet your horse's energy requirements. So Karen, that is already so I'm like, oh my gosh, what are we talking about? I love it. So can you get us started?
Okay. Well, nowadays we face a lot of issues with our horses. We've learned that if we feed them too much starch and sugar, so too much grains, that it causes a lot of trouble in the hind gut, and it leads to situations like ulcers and colic and also insulin resistance. So we've learned that we need to come up with a different source of energy, and that source of energy has turned out to be fat. And actually, fats are kind of found all over the place. Did you know, Reese, that your pasture is anywhere from 2.7 to 4.8% fat?
No, really?
Yeah, so when your horse is out eating grass, he's actually eating fat.
Oh.
And one of the reasons why horses look so nice after they've been grazing out on grass for a while is because, they're eating quite a bit of grass. So they're actually getting quite a bit of fat.
Interesting.
Kind of puts that pretty bloom on their coat.
And Karen, would that kind of depend on what, in Lexington, that's fantastic. We have great grass, but what about different, if you're out west or you're in different areas of the country?
Well, sure. And that would be that's why I gave you the range. It's anywhere from 2% to 5% fat, depending on your grass. So, if you're out in Utah and you're grazing out in the desert, you're obviously not going to get that kind of fat in your grass. But if you're in an area where there's a decent pasture grass growing, then you are going to get some fat in your grass. But a lot of people don't realize
that like
there
vegetable oil fat? Is that oils that are contained within the plant?
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Yep.
That makes sense.
That's what it would be. And then, so there's also some fat in your grass hay. If you get hay, if you feed your horse hay, it can be anywhere from as low as 1.5 to as high as 3% fat, depending on the grass hay. So your horse is always getting a little bit of fat in his diet anyway. So it's something that they would naturally be digesting. So it's something that they can digest. A lot of people associate fat mainly with kind of animal byproducts and things.
Animal fats,
and they would
yeah.
think, well, yeah, a horse isn't ever eating fat. A horse doesn't eat fat. But that's not true. They do eat fat. They just eat vegetable sources of fat versus animal sources of fat. And of course, we all know the vegetable sources tend to be a little bit healthier for you.
Excellent. So let's say, because here in Florida, obviously our horses, they go out for like half an hour. At home, they're out all day. So talk to us about how that changes. Now we have a big change in the horse's diet. So how would we, kind of bring the fat back in, or, if we needed to have horses gain some weight?
Yeah, absolutely. So what you're looking at then, or oftentimes even if your horse is out on pasture, if you start working them harder, then, they need more calories, just like a person does. If you work harder, if you run hard, you need more calories in your diet. And your hays and your typical concentrates that are high in starches and sugars, you can only feed so much of that. A horse has a limited ability to digest starch and sugar. And once you hit that limit, the starches and sugars are just passed through their stomach into the hind gut. And when they get into the hind gut, the bugs that are back there, they love that starch and sugar, but it causes them to produce a lot of lactic acid, and it changes the pH balance in the hind gut. And that's where you get laminitis and you get colic when horses are eating too much starch and sugar in their grain. So if you've got a horse where you're feeding them the max grain that you can, starchy, sugary grains, and you're feeding them all the hay that you can, and you're still not meeting their energy requirements, then you can add fat into the diet. Or if you have a horse that's very sensitive to starch and sugar, you can replace those kinds of feeds with fat, and you can meet the energy requirements that they have.
So tell us a little bit about sources of fat, because I know the old method is just to get some corn oil and dump it in the grain. But I think there's only so much you can add to the grain that way. What are different ways to add fats?
Right, and corn oil too. That was an older fashioned way of adding fat, and we've learned that the omega-3 fatty acids are important, and corn oil is very high in omega-6 fatty acids, which are pro-inflammatory. So if you were adding oils, you would want to add, you would want to add a flaxseed oil or a fish oil that is higher in omega-3s. But again, you can only get a horse to eat so much oil. One ingredient that we have found is really good for horses as far as a fat ingredient is rice bran.
Okay.
And rice bran it's readily available. You can find it, a lot of places. Our particular product is called Equijewel. When you're feeding rice bran, you want to make sure that it's stabilized, because as with any fat, it can go rancid if it's not treated. Equijewel is heat stabilized, and that stops it from going rancid. And it's a natural process. So it's a natural product with a natural process of stabilization. Some rice bran products will be stabilized with chemicals instead. So that's something to look at.
How would you know that, Karen? I'm sorry, jumping right in.
You would have to ask the manufacturer how they stabilize their rice bran.
Okay.
Or look for, like, we have heat stabilized on our bag so that it's easy for you to tell how it's done.
Got it.
And then, of course, fat provides almost 2.25 times as much energy as the carbohydrates. So you feed a lot less and you get a lot more energy. So you can make your meal size much smaller.
Is it fairly easily digested by a horse?
It is, once the horse gets accustomed to it. Like when we talked about in the beginning, there is fat in a horse's diet naturally. So they have some capacity to digest fat. And then, of course, as with anything, you would introduce it slowly to the diet. And then once the horse is accustomed to it, they digest it very well.
Are there any dangers associated with this feeding? I mean, could you overfeed it?
Well, like anything. I mean, if you overfed fat, you would get some diarrhea. Horses can tolerate up to 20% of the entire diet, of the total diet in fat. That's a lot of fat.
Yeah.
It is a lot of,
Yeah, that's buckets.
You'd have to really work hard to overfeed it.
Yeah.
Got it.
But yeah, you can. Some of the benefits of fat are that, like we said before, the concentrate portion of the horse's meal can be smaller. You really never want to feed more than 5 pounds per feeding, because that's about the capacity of the stomach. So you can feed smaller meals because it's more energy dense. And that lowers the risk, of course, of any digestive upset. Feeds that are high in soluble carbs, which are the starches and sugars, they cause a lot of hormone surges. They burn very quickly. It makes the insulin rise very quickly and drop very quickly. And, if anybody is, if you've ever been hyperglycemic, you know how that feels. When all of a sudden your sugar goes up and it goes down and you feel terrible. Well, fats don't do that. They burn very slow and steady, and they reduce those hormone spikes. So horses that tend to be excitable, sometimes that excitability, like people used to say, corn is a hot feed or oats is a hot feed. It was actually those hormone spikes that cause that excitability, and you don't get that in fat.
Oh, so Karen, what if you have a horse that's a really picky eater? Every horse I've had that's been skinny is typically a picky eater. How do you kind of combat that?
Well, you can use combined products. Like we have a product called Endure Extra, which is a combination of rice bran and flax. and some other concentrated fats. And you only have to feed 4 to 8 ounces a day. And we combine that with some pre and probiotics that will help the horse's gut will help their appetite. They'll feel better, so they'll eat more. So that's the type of product that I would recommend if you have a real picky horse. The Equijewel rice brand is very well accepted by horses. It has a kind of nutty flavor to it, and they seem to really like it.
Yeah. And I've had great luck with that Endure Extra. My picky eater, Zoe, loves it. And he's really picky, and he does a really good job. I actually had to call Karen and say, I think I need to back him off, the Endure Extra. And it's been a really, really helpful product for us, especially moving him around and showing he has a tendency to come off feed, and he eats it really, really well. Well, Karen, thank you so much for coming on tonight. This was a great topic, and I can't wait for next month's KPP Supplement Tip of the Month. Karen, how would people find you online and find some more information about just any supplement questions they have?
Well, they can go to kppusa.com, and we also have a Facebook page. So if anybody has a question to ask, they can go on the Facebook page. I monitor that pretty much all the time and ask their questions. Or they could also email us at info@kppusa.com.
And Karen is fantastic. She will answer any question, and I'm sure I've asked some really silly ones, but she is super easy to work with and is so good at this. So, Karen, thanks so much for your time, and we will look forward to our tip next month.
Well, there you have it. And you can find links to today's guests and topics at horsetipdaily.com. This podcast was made possible through the generous support of Kentucky Performance Products and listeners like you. Learn how you can help support Horse Radio Network programming and qualify for auditors-only perks by going to horsetipdaily.com and clicking on the Become an Auditor banner in the center of the page. This is Coach Jen, and I'll be back again soon with another tip. So until then, go ride your horse. The Horse Radio Network and the Horse Radio Network hosts are not responsible for statements of guests or their opinions. Use your own judgment when listening to the tips provided by the experts on Horse Tip Daily.